It's time to talk iOS, emulation, and retro gaming. Apple for about a year now has allowed, well, of course the screen went blank when I was trying to show this. Apple for about a year now has allowed iOS emulators to exist on the App Store. So now we can participate in retro gaming. I really want this to be a one-stop guide, so I'm going to cover quite a bit of topics like setting up iOS emulators, iOS file management, comparing Android to iOS just to give everyone a sense of where the two are compared to each other, and then finally I'm going to do some hands-on testing with two controllers and also some other options. Before we get further, I've written a guide to accompany this video, so any links will be in the guide and also in the description. The very first thing we need for iOS is emulators. I'm going to grab the following four emulators: RetroArch, Delta, Gamma, PPSSPP. On screen are the consoles supported by each emulator. Delta is the easiest to use and RetroArch is the most powerful. Please check the written guide as they'll have the latest information. RetroArch and Delta will probably add more support over time, and there might be new emulators. But as of recording this is pretty much it for iOS emulation. Just for a reference point, here's what the Android emulation circuit looks like, and this isn't even a complete list. Yeah, you might say that Android has a little bit of an advantage. I've downloaded those four emulators to my iPhone, so let's get to it. The next step is getting games into the emulators, and this is a two-step process. First, you just need to connect it to your Mac and then locate it in the Finder. You may need to authorize your phone to your computer. From the Finder, under Locations, click Your Phone, then click the Files tab. Apple makes this a lot more confusing than it needs to be. You can drop files in, but you can't really manage them. If we expand RetroArch, we can see I already have 9.3 gigabytes of ROMs, but I can't open up this folder. I'm going to table this discussion about file management, but we'll come back to it when we talk about RetroArch. Let's add a few games to Delta. Now for the obligatory legal disclaimer. Downloading games is not legal, especially if you don't own them. Therefore, I will not be providing links to the ROMs, but you can use your own moral judgment, as byte for byte these games are no longer sold new. Alright, I got that out of the way, and I will return to RetroArch later. After that, we just open up Delta on the iPhone and make sure that we add all the games by clicking the plus button. I'll select one of these games and then click the Select All button and add. To navigate between the consoles, we just swipe left and right. Then we tap the game we want to play and then we're good to go. For this example, because the Nintendo DS has a microphone, you need to grant access if you'd like to emulate it. Although this particular game, I don't think uses it. By default, with all the emulators we're going to be looking at, they will auto-map controllers. Customizing the controls in Delta is a little weird, so let me quickly demonstrate this. And I'm sorry, you're just going to see reflections of the room. That's just what it is. The iPhone screen is very reflective. Click the settings, then go to Player 1, the wireless controller, which this is not a wireless controller, but whatever. Click Customize Controls, and it's rotation locked. You just click the button you want to set, and then press it. And then if you need to do a different console, the N64 being a good example, that's the nightmare you're going to deal with. But at least you can change the controls. I realized I didn't mention this earlier, but you can load on games using iCloud. I've already stashed 2 games on my iCloud drive to download. So I'm going to click the plus button like I did before, except now I'm going to go navigate to iCloud. Then it's just a matter of locating the folder. I named it Game Boy, so it's in this mess of files. Then once I get in the folder, I select the 2 files I want to add and then click Open. These will now be downloaded to my phone. And of course, you can use this technique for other emulators we're going to talk about. Also, it's possible to share ROM libraries between different emulators. While I have not covered setting up RetroArch yet, I've already copied over Super NES games into the RetroArch folder. I don't want to have duplicate copies of games on my phone and waste space, so I'm just going to add all these Super Nintendo games to Delta. And it should go without saying, it might take a little bit for it to add all the games in if you're adding a ton at once like I did. Here it is with more SNES games than I'll ever play. Delta's a pretty good showing. This is what I expect a iOS emulator to be like. Here I am playing Super Street Fighter 2 for the Super Nintendo, and it's emulating properly, minus a few pops here and there.
You win!
Sound is going to be a reoccurring theme in this video. And Delta save states are triggered by clicking the button Map to Menu, clicking Save State, and then clicking plus. And on the off chance you're not familiar with save states, these let you save a game at any point in the emulator. If I click the menu button again, I can then load my save state, resuming exactly where I was in my game. For N64 emulation, Delta uses the Mupin or Muppin, I'm not really sure how you say that, 64 plus emulation core. The emulation quality is very good, and I didn't notice much in the way of audio glitches. Here's a clip of Cruisin' USA's delightfully terrible music. Game Boy Advance emulation was almost perfect, except for the mildest of pops. Here's a clip from Mario Golf. If you didn't hear that, that's because it was pretty mild, and it doesn't happen very frequently. Delta uses Melon DS for Nintendo DS emulation, therefore it's very good. This is about the best experience I've ever had emulating this console because of the touchscreen support. Touch-heavy games like Scribblenauts are very pleasant to play on this. While this game did get an iOS port, this is just the superior version. For the Nintendo DS, you can also provide optional BIOS. The emulation core, the software that powers Nintendo DS emulation in Delta, uses reverse-engineered BIOS. In a very few select rare edge cases, this might cause some problems. BIOS are subject to copyright, just like ROMs. I've copied the BIOS files into the Delta emulator. Now let's link them. And that's all it takes. Again, this is completely optional. Next Delta tip. I found that Delta is inconsistent about auto-downloading artwork for games. So here's the recommended path if you want to download the box art. Long press the game and select Change Artwork. Pick Games Database and tap the artwork you want. That's it. Now to a troubleshooting tip. I had a problem getting NES games to load until I read the following solution. Force quit the emulator, reopen it, then long press a ROM to get a preview. And in the preview window you should see the game. Now you can load the game as normal. And as expected, NES emulation is very good. Even before Apple allowed emulators on the app stores, you could play NES games in the browser, so this isn't really much of an accomplishment. But it's here and it works well. The next emulator to set up is PPSSPP. There's two versions of this emulator on the App Store. One is paid, one is not. They are the same, but the $5 goes towards the emulation author continuing developing the emulator. Copying games to the iPhone is the same process as before, just drag and drop. Then it should be no surprise that all the games show up in your library. The emulator supports a wide variety of different ROM formats, so whatever your game's archives in, it probably supports it. PPSP has quite a bit of settings. This will not be a deep dive into this emulator, but you can change the graphic options in this one. The written guide contains more details about graphic options. Out of the box, it should be configured for enhanced graphics, but I did bump mine up to 5x resolution, and damn does this not look good. Because the iPhone has processing to spare, I also enabled upscaling of textures and made sure that texture filtering was maxed out. I'd play the music, but SSX uses copyrighted music and I don't want to get flagged by YouTube. Instead of the catchier music from SSX, here's The Warriors.
You got nowhere to run!
Ready, cowboy?
Yeah. Now!
For a non-iOS specific emulator, the UI on this is fairly competent. If you touch the screen at any point, it'll bring up the touch controls so you can then do things like save states. The buttons are a bit small, but you can save and load pretty easily. There really isn't much to say about PPSSPP other than it's fantastic. As of recording this video, this is the best of iPhone emulation. And now for our next emulator, Gamma. This one's semi-paid because it has an ad-supported free version. To use the non-ad supported version, it costs $5. This emulator has received some blowback because of the ad-supported version, using tracking to support the ads. And on top of that, it's not necessarily the best PlayStation emulation experience on iOS. I will talk about RetroArch next, but I will cover Gamma first. And just so we're clear, I'm using the paid version. This removes the ads, of course, but also adds in a few more support features like .rar so you can leave your ISOs or bin.qs compressed. I paid the $5, so I'm using the Pro version for this video. Copying the games is exactly the same process as Delta, so we can skip that. Gamma is pretty basic. By default, it stretches the screen, but it does have an optional widescreen hack that works with most games. Go to your settings, and then scroll down to video, and check the widescreen 3D. Now you can see that Bushido Blade is still stretched, but much less so. The UI, including save states, works pretty much exactly the same as Delta, so I'm not going to bother covering all the settings. Another setting you need to be aware of is enabling DualShock for the analog stick controllers. You can do this just by clicking the menu here. Now there's just one last thing to do, and that's to add in the Sony PlayStation BIOS for maximum compatibility. According to the emulation author, certain games do require require this for the memory cards to actually save. So if you want that functionality, you need to do this. Here I have a list of PlayStation BIOS. I'm going to drag just one of these in. Now from the emulator, click Settings, Gamma Core, and then select your BIOS file. I noticed it's asking for a file named bios.bin, but I didn't rename mine and it worked fine. That's about it for this emulator. It works pretty well, but doesn't have any graphical enhancements that you would find in a lot of other PlayStation emulators. Now for the final boss of emulation, and that is RetroArch. It's best to think of RetroArch as a bunch of emulators glued together in what are known as cores with a unified graphics user interface or GUI. RetroArch is not the friendliest emulator to use. There are a lot of tutorials on it, but I'm going to do a speed run to getting you up and running with iOS in a way that's sane. The first order of business is to change the UI for one that works better with a controller. So we're going to click Settings, User Interface, then we need to scroll all the way to the bottom and select Menu. From here we select XMB. Now for the changes to take place, we're going to have to close the app and then relaunch it. Just a fair warning, the XMB interface is terrible to use with touch. You pretty much need a gamepad to operate it. Now it's finally time to talk about iOS file management. As always with emulation, we're going to need ROMs as they represent the game, so I'm going to copy over a bunch of these for different consoles. Since I'm not very concerned about space, I'm going to copy over entire ROM libraries. Like before, I'm just dragging these onto the desired application. Now, I could leave these just in the root of this directory, but we're going to be a little more organized about this. Within the Files app from the Browse tab, I'm going to tap on my iPhone, then tap RetroArch. Now we're going to create a directory called Games. From here, we're going to move all these folders into this directory. To move, long press the folder, then select Move. The reason why we're doing this is we only have to scan one directory. I'm going to repeat this process for all my folders, but we're going to skip ahead through the magic of film editing. As a very quick aside, if you find the Files app really tedious, there are third-party applications like iMazing that will let you do direct file management. Moving on. From RetroArch, I'm going to tab over to the Import Content and go to Scan Directory. Since I didn't move this inside the RetroArch application, I'm going to have to go to Parent Directory, then select my Games folder, then select Scan Directory, and this can take quite a while depending on how many ROMs you're importing. If you're low on battery, you'll probably want to have it on a charger for this. Now it's time to do something you normally don't do in an iOS application, that's updates within the application itself. From the main menu, go down to Online Updater. Then click Update on everything from core info files on below. At this point, you're ready to play some games. I'm going to tab over to the Super NES because it has a bunch of different cores and we need to demonstrate this. I'm going to scroll down and skip ahead because I have so many ROMs to a game that we're ready to play. When you first select a ROM, you'll see a menu that says Run. The first time you hit Run on a ROM, you'll have to pick your core. Not all emulation cores are created equal, and some are designed for accuracy and others for speed. With an iPhone, you get your cake and eat it too, as it has plenty of CPU to go around. But which emulation core should you use? iOS right now does not have as many core options as its Android counterpart. For SNES, I'd recommend BNES. We will select that and click Run. We can change RetroArch's default overlay behavior, but for now we're just going to click the up arrow to hide it. For whatever reason right now in RetroArch, often the Android counterparts perform better and don't have as many audio glitches. Each emulation core has its own set of features, so let's check that out. The game I'm playing right now uses what is known as Mode 7. This was used in games like Super Mario Kart, Pilot Wings, and F-Zero. If I go to the menu, then go down to Core Options, then scroll down to HD Mode 7. In scale, I'm going to set this at pretty high. I'm going to select 1440p. Then I'm going to enable Super Sampling. This effect is subtle and you might not even notice it. But if I do a side-by-side comparison, if you look really close, there's more graphics fidelity on the ground. If you don't see the effect right away, look on the left side of the screen where the track meets the horizon and then compare it to the right side. The left side of the screen is graphically enhanced. With the SNES, there's also the BSNES HD Beta, and I'm using it for this game right now because it enables widescreen mode for Mode 7 games. It can be a bit glitchier and has lower performance. This video would be hours long if I tried to break down every single option, but fortunately, usually there's descriptions that let you know what you're messing with. Some of the files we updated help with these descriptions. Alright, I just beat this race, so let's do a save state. Click down the save state. You can see we're on save state 0, so we're going to save in this slot. and we're good. With RetroArch, we can do more with save states. Let's enable autosaves. Tab over to the settings section, and then go down to saving. In this menu are quite a bit of settings, but we're going to scroll down to 2 of particular interest. There's 2 settings here I want to check for convenience. That's autosave state and autoload state. Now if I quit a game, it'll autosave, and when I load it back up, it'll resume where I left off. Now let's do another interface tweak, which is to hide the interface when a controller is connected. Tab the settings and select user interface, and then go down to on-screen overlay. Then locate hide overlay when controller is connected, and turn it on. The default should only bring up the on-screen overlays when the screen is touched. Alright, I'm trying to load a Sega CD game, but it won't work. That is because this console requires BIOS. Some video game consoles need BIOS in order to function properly, and we already saw this with Gamma. On my blog post is a list of recommended BIOS files. These are subject to copyright, so you'll have to find these on your own. As of recording this, the supported consoles from RetroArch that require BIOS are the Game Boy Advance, Neo Geo, Nintendo DS, Sega CD, PlayStation, and TurboGrafx CD. Let's add the BIOS files for the Sega CD. Let's drag and drop these files into RetroArch. Then from the Files app, we're going to move these into RetroArch System. This is the default location for RetroArch, but it can be different if you want it to be. Mind you, you don't have to do this one at a time if you tap Select in the top right corner. I just forgot to do that while recording the video. Then in RetroArch, we're going to tab to System, go down to Directory, then go to System BIOS, and make sure it's linked to the System folder. Now we can boot Sega CD games, and either core seems to work pretty well for this. Alright, let's talk PlayStation emulation in RetroArch. I've already added PlayStation games and scanned for them and added the BIOS to the System folder. Now when I click Run, I'll have my choice of core. I want to select Beetle PSXHW. This one has 3D hardware acceleration for improved graphics. After that's selected, I'm going to hit Run again. Here's what this looks like without any graphics acceleration, but we can improve that. We're going to hit the menu button and go to Core Options, then to Video. Set the internal GPU resolution to 4x for 1080p. Then we're going to set the texture filtering, and we have quite a bit of options. I'm not going to go into each one of these, but I recommend SABR as it reduces some of the posterization effects on textures. There's articles and Reddit threads that compare all of these. Under multi-sampled anti-aliasing, also known as MSAA, we're going to set this at 8x. Then we're going to exile video and go to PGXP. Set the operation mode to memory only, turn on primitive culling, then turn on perspective correct texturing. PGXP primitive culling can cause issues in certain games, but I haven't ever experienced that. Now when I go back to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, it looks a lot better. Much better than what Gamma can do, so there you have it, a free option that's better. I realize there's one more thing we can do, and that's widescreen mode. Go down to Emulation Hacks, then enable widescreen mode hack. Now your game will be in widescreen. Fun tip, people often post their preferred settings for various games. This guy's posted his settings for Xenogears. Now there's one more thing we need to do, and that's enable DualShock mode for a game like Ape Escape. But right before that, let's download some cover art. This is pretty easy. Hit download thumbnails to get a preview image. I have Ape Escape loaded, so I need to enable analog sticks. Scroll down to Controls, go to Port 1 Controls, then make sure the device type is set to DualShock. Now I can play Ape Escape since this game requires DualShock controls. To circle back to cover art downloading, we do not need to download these one at a time, so go to the main menu, then go to Online Updater, then go to Playlist Thumbnails Updater, then click the system you want to download cover art for. For large libraries, it can take quite a bit of time and eat up a decent amount of space. It does look cool though. Now here's a rabbit hole you can go down deep, and that is shaders. Here's the Sega Genesis game Vector Man in its pixelated glory, but I'm going to make this look a little bit less chunky. So I'll bring up the menu and then go down to Shaders, and then from here enable Video Shaders. Then it's a matter of locating the shader I want to use. I'm going to click Load Preset, go into my Shaders folder, then I'm going to go down to Edge Smoothing. Then inside here I'm going to locate Scale FX. Then finally I'm going to select Scale FX-Hybrid. Alright, here it is in action, and you can see that the edges are indeed smoother. Vector Man and the clouds do look rounder. This of course is very much a personal preference. You might think this looks better or not, but we can go a bit further with it. Let's apply a CRT filter on top of this. Back at the Video Shaders menu, I'm going to append a CRT effect. The order does matter, so pending means that it'll apply this effect after it's already applied edge smoothing. I'm going to select CRT Guess Advanced HD, and then click Apply Preset, and now we can see the result. You can of course lose quite a bit of time exploring these. I found these two filters by looking at other people's recommendations. When you find settings you like, you can save it as your own preset. Here's a little troubleshooting technique I learned along the way. Here's me trying to bump up the N64 graphics performance. I wanted higher resolution graphics. After I messed with the settings, RetroArch would crash when I tried to load an N64 game. There might be a way to configure cores without loading them, but I couldn't figure it out. However, you can reset a core's settings just by deleting its config file. Check this out. Open your Files app on your iPhone and go to RetroArch. Then go into the config folder. For the N64 is Mupin or Muppin64, and then just delete that folder. Now we're able to play N64 games again. There's one last emulator to talk about, and this one is different because you can't get it in the App Store, therefore you have to do a lot of workarounds. It's Dolphin for the GameCube and Wii. This one is tough. So if you don't care about doing sketchy things with your iPhone, just use the chapter skip ahead and go to the next section, or just use your playhead and move it about 4.5 minutes into the future. Let's get to this. 1 second. Alright, I think we're in the clear. It's just us nerds here so we can talk freely. Dolphin for iOS uses what's known as a just-in-time compiler, which Apple does not allow to be distributed through its App Store, so we need alternative methods to get this thing onto our iPhones. And the directions I found aren't the most clear, so I tried to compile my own notes. This is not going to be the best tutorial on this, but rather a Cliff Notes edition. The prerequisites are patience, a lack of caution, an Apple developer account, the free tier will work with some caveats, and an iPhone with developer mode enabled. There's multiple ways to approach this. The easiest is to download the IPA file, aka the app, and sign it with your own certificate in Xcode and then transfer it to your iPhone, use debug mode to connect to your iPhone and the app, then enable JIT. However, unless you're paying Apple $99 a year for a paid developer account, you'll have to repeat this every 7 days. The best summary of this process is a Reddit comment on all things the Vision Pro, which is on screen right now. This is the first time I've mentioned the Vision Pro probably since it's been announced on my YouTube channel. The other path is sideloading, which I decided to test out, and it is tedious and not very well documented. I do have a paid Apple developer account, so believe me when I say the first option is better. You've been sufficiently warned. Now, I want people to be clear who are watching this in the future. This process will probably change as it just recently changed between iOS 16 and iOS 17. So be sure to consult the directions. But this gives you a taste of what it takes to get JIT emulation working under iOS. Prior to iOS 17, JIT could be enabled locally without Xcode, but now you have to stream it to the iPhone. Let's begin. Step 1. Download Alt Server and Jitterbug pair. Step 2. Plug in your phone and be sure you've enabled developer mode under General, Privacy, and Security at the bottom of the screen. Step 3. Launch Air Server and from the menu, select Install Alt Store, which will require your Apple ID, which they claim is secure and they do not see any of your information, but I'm changing my password after doing this, and I'm also doing this on my iPhone 14 Pro, which is not my main iPhone. Step 4. From your iPhone, launch Alt Store. If you don't see it, you'll need to reboot your phone. At least that's what happened in my case. Step 5. In the Alt Store, log in with your Apple ID. This is needed for re-signing applications and follow any on-screen instructions. Be sure to refresh the app as it instructs. Step 6. In the Alt Store, under Sources, click the plus button and add Oatmeal Dome Alt Store Source. This is the source for the DolphiniOS emulator. Step 7. Install the beta, and I think I may have had to reboot for this to work. Step 8. This is where you have a branching path, as you have two options. You can use SideJIT server locally, or trusting some dude's website called JIT Streamer. I'm saying f it we ball, so I'm going to use JIT Streamer. Step 9. With your iPhone connected to your computer, double-click Jitterbug, and you'll need to authorize it on your iPhone. Then run it again. It will output a file that will probably land in the root of your user directory, and it will have the suffix of mobile device pairing. Step 10. Download WireGuard from the App Store on your iPhone. Step 11. Go to the JIT Streamer website and upload the mobile device pairing file. Then download the .conf file it generates. Step 12. Transfer this file to your iPhone. Step 13. From the WireGuard application, click on the Create New Configuration from File and locate your .conf file on your iPhone. Step 14. In VPNs, enable WireGuard to connect to the JIT Streamer. Step 15. You'll need to download the shortcut from the JIT Streamer website and run it on your iPhone. Then follow all its instructions. Step 16. Transfer games into the software folder in Dolphin iOS. The games have to go into this folder. Step 17. Now you can finally play. Emulation isn't perfect in my very limited testing. That is the process how you can sideload Dolphin iOS to your iPhone and also other applications like the emulator Provenance. For whatever reason, I couldn't get Provenance to load, but it emulates basically the same set of consoles as RetroArch. I'm sorry guys, but this info will be in my guide, but don't expect me to lend tech support if you contact me about it. This is a proceed at your own risk adventure that really should only be done if you understand the implications of what you're doing. I figured out all of this by reading the documents, even if they're vague. So if you're having problems, consult the official website. Dolphin for iOS didn't run smoothly as expected as there was some hitching. JIT streamer might be to blame. I'd personally strongly recommend doing the re-signing code method after going through this, as there's multiple points that are unnerving when it comes to credentials and VPNs. Alright, we are now done discussing individual emulators, so let's talk about these two controllers that I have. So for this test I have a backbone controller which doesn't have much of a backbone, a Zike Z331 controller, and an Android-based game console, the Odin 2. This should be a pretty interesting matchup as the iPhone 16 Pro is about 1.5 times faster than the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which is in the Odin 2. However, the Android emulation scene is much more mature. If you're not up in Qualcomm chipsets, this is a 4nm late 2022 8-core chipset. For my iPhone people, this is in between a iPhone 12 Pro and an iPhone 13 Pro according to Geekbench benchmarks. These are very similar products. Both controllers sport dual analog sticks in the Xbox configuration. And of course this comes with XYAB buttons, D-pad, dual shoulder buttons, the lower of which are analog triggers, 4 interface buttons, and a USB-C port that allows charging while the controller's plugged in. The biggest difference other than the form factor, pun intended, is the backbone has a headphone jack where the Zike does not, and the Zike has additional shoulder buttons on the back. This is very similar to the Odin 2, which also has the same shoulder buttons on the back. Even as a small-time YouTuber, I get a lot of product offers, but this one actually makes sense for this video. This is the Anker laptop PowerBank, and it's the nicest battery I've ever seen. Let me demonstrate how cool this thing is. Just pull out our little hidden USB-C cable, and I can start charging my iPhone. But wait, I have a second device I need to charge. So how about I just plug in my second device, because this device has 2 built-in USB-C cables. Mobile gaming's a good way to drain your battery, but this could charge an iPhone 16 Pro almost 7 times over. As always, I didn't get paid for this, so buy it or don't, but I think this thing's pretty nice. The backbone is a sleek, minimalist, slim road warrior, although it trades ergonomics to achieve this. I found it a little too easy to accidentally hit both shoulder buttons, and I had trouble adjusting to the low travel analog sticks. By no means would I call these bad, I think it's just a personal preference here. However, the D-pad, for whatever reason, just worked better than the Zike. I don't know why, as it felt responsive, but the slide motions just didn't track well. I'm not exactly good at this game, but I do expect to be able to spam fireballs, as that's about all I know how to do. The backbone just felt more natural, whereas I struggled with the Zike. However, this is about the only time I preferred the backbone. If you notice thus far in this video, I'm almost exclusively using the Zike controller. The backbone has several glaring issues. The biggest and most criminal is the shovelware. If you install their app, every time you plug in the controller, it'll bring it to the front. The Backbone app wants you to sign in, and it wants $40 a year. It's a controller backbone. What the hell do I need a subscription for? I'm starting to go full Lewis Rossman, so I'm going to calm down a bit. Apparently it offers some sort of clip recording, which iOS already has built in, and perhaps this is more convenient, and also has voice chat, I think, and some sort of cloud connectivity for gaming services. It's all stuff you don't need the app for. Okay, you'll probably think I'm being dramatic as you can just ignore the app, right? Well, if you press 2 of the buttons, it'll bring up the app. Now you're probably thinking, well, just remap the buttons, stupid. In the system preferences, if you go to General, then Game Controller, these extra buttons cannot be mapped. The only thing you can do is delete their shitty app so these buttons are no longer a liability if accidentally clicked. But I need to be fair to Backbone because I'm pretty sure this is an iOS limitation. That is foreshadowing. The next gripe I have is inserting your phone into the Backbone and detaching it from it. The Zike has a bendy USB port by design, and this lets you easily insert and remove the iPhone. It's a really slick design, but the Backbone? No. The technique I figured out is to push the left side of the controller with the phone and then snap it in and out. Even then, it's not exactly smooth, and you can pinch yourself when removing the controller, although it hasn't really hurt me. It's not the biggest of deal, but it is tedious. What's far more annoying is the lips on the edges that hold the iPhone in place, as they'll interfere with you trying to interact with your iPhone. Modern iOS requires a lot of edge swiping, and this just gets in the way of you trying to use your goddamn phone. It's frustrating, as this is almost a really cool accessory. Now the Zike, on the other hand, while not nearly as sleek, has no issues in usability, and it doesn't have any shovelware. It doesn't get in the way of using your damn phone. Did I mention it's cheaper? Oh yeah, by quite a bit. There's a little more to the story, so we'll come back to that. I paid good money for the backbone, nearly $90, and Zike decided to toss me this controller to see if I liked it, and I'm glad they did, because it gave me a great reference point for the backbone. In the interest of full disclosure, they did not pay me a cent for this review, and these are my own words. I have full editorial control. I ended up using the Zike for most of my gameplay footage, as it's a lot easier to toss on, easy to use, analog sticks feel good except for a bit too much dead zone. I like the larger buttons, especially the triggers, and it felt more natural in my hands. Even if this controller wasn't significantly cheaper than the backbone, I would still recommend it because it doesn't have shovelware, has superior ergonomics, and it just doesn't get in the way of key functionality on your phone. There are some edge cases where the backbone is the superior option. If you really like compact controllers or have small hands, or really like low travel analog sticks or better D-pads, then just maybe the backbone is for you. Everyone else probably wants the Zike. There's definitely design choices that suggest a lot of TLC went into making this product, which makes these lips all the stranger, as everything else seems considered. It just gets in the way. I have too many complaints with this controller to give it a strong recommend, especially at $90, and the fact that they're pushing shovelware at that price point, that just feels gross. I have not spent nearly as much time talking about the Zike controller, and that's because it's just super familiar. It's Xbox up front, and then it's PlayStation on back with the way the grips and shoulder buttons are laid out. The only thing that's really not great about this is this mediocre D-pad. Otherwise, it has a lot more programmable buttons. You have these additional shoulder buttons, which gives you a variety of ways to grip. Then you have additional face buttons that you can program. Wrong, and that's because I assumed Apple does things correctly. If I go to Game Controller, we can see this thing thinks it's a PlayStation controller, no big deal, right? Go to New Profile. I like this button. I want to press this button all the time. I'm going to make this my down button. Oh, it's not there. I can't map it by even pressing it. Doesn't matter, this button just doesn't exist to iOS. That is really great design, Apple. I love that. Oh, I know what's up. They didn't want to make the system preferences too confusing, so they didn't put all those extra buttons in there. So I bet if I go to the B button and I press my favorite button ever, beep, oh look, it didn't map. Beep, beep, nope, still didn't map. That's because I decided to do something Apple didn't approve of, and they don't have to design for those edge cases. Apple engineers don't have to do shit in these cases. I wish I was an Apple engineer. You don't know how late in the editing process I was. I almost published this before I discovered this. And that means these buttons right here, and that button, and one of these others, I can't remember, just cannot be mapped. And the only hope we have is that one day Apple just changes its mind. That's it. Just hopes and dreams. I just really like this controller. I stand by most everything I said, but sometimes when you're working on a video, the right person at the right company at the right time reaches out to you. And this was the case for Zike. They reached out to me and they said they wanted to send me a game controller. This isn't the normal thing I review or even touch on this channel. But I was like, I'm working on this emulation tutorial. It'd be sure great if I had another controller to compare against instead of this backbone. So I received it, and I didn't do my due diligence. This is a white label product that you can find plenty of variants of on Amazon. Are they as good or worse? I have no idea, but on screen is a bunch of these, and they look all very similar. Is Zike the correct version to get? I don't know. Mine works pretty well, in fact. Now, I want to be clear, this doesn't make this an illegitimate product or Zike an illegitimate brand. It just changes the math a little. One of my most recommended pieces of hardware on the definitive Mac Pro upgrade guide is a PCIe card that houses 2 NVMe SSDs on a single PCIe card for computers that don't support that. And it's wonderful. It comes in a bunch of different names like Ablecom and Lycom and some others. I can't even remember all the different versions. This seems like one of those products and explains the huge price differential between this, which is a one of one, versus this, which is one of many. To come back to that point in the backbone section when I was talking about mapping buttons, which you probably forgot about, the only option I can see for these custom buttons to work is to have a custom app. Too bad the custom app, though, is just basically shovelware. You can also use with iOS popular game controllers like this PS5 controller. I just need to put in pair mode by holding these two buttons. I think I'm doing this right from this angle. Oh, there it goes. And then it will show up at the bottom of here. It'll take a second to focus, but you can see my DualSense wireless controller. And then if I click this, it pairs to the controller. The advantage here is you can buy accessories that will clamp your phone to the controller, and then you can use your phone in a position sort of like so. There exists for ones for the PS4 and PS5 and probably the Xbox controllers. It's an option. It's just so apparent that I'm not a professional presenter. I had one of these devices for a PS4 controller, and it was a little awkward because of the ergonomics. The weight's way behind the iPhone, so it's not the most comfortable to use for a long time. It's not nearly as good as one of these where the weight's in the center. However, I do recommend them if you're looking to dip your toes into controllers for iOS because they work pretty well, and if you have one of these, they're like $10. Now we can finally bring in the Odin 2 as our Android ambassador. This is not going to be a full review on this because I am just an occasional gamer and I wouldn't do it justice. It's just much more suited for gaming than the iPhone. You can play PS2, GameCube, Dreamcast games, and even the Nintendo.
Censored.
Alright, jokes aside, there's a certain game company that'll send DMCA takedown notices to switch off your YouTube channel regardless of how big you are for merely talking about emulating it. So I think it's time we switch subjects. I originally planned to do a much deeper dive comparing iOS versus Android emulation, but the setup difficulty is remarkably similar. Some Android devices like the Odin 2 support memory cards, which makes file management much easier. Setting up RetroArch on Android or iOS is remarkably similar and a pain in the ass, and PPSSPP is pretty much the same on either platform. Just by the mere presence of emulators for more modern consoles and ports of great emulators like DuckStation gives Android the default win. Also, Android emulation seems to be more mature as I didn't experience the audio glitches that I found in RetroArch under iOS. The Odin 2 is just clearly the better option, but at $450, this is getting into Steam Deck territory. My hope is in a few years, $200 retro game consoles will be capable of HD PlayStation 2 emulation, assuming there isn't a global recession due to senseless trade wars. I really try and keep non-digital politics out of this channel, but that's just the reality of today. That said, I found the Zike controller paired with my iPhone more comfortable to hold than the Odin 2 and to use. I haven't mentioned up until this point, but there is a PlayStation 2 emulator called Play, but it's not in the App Store and only can play about a third of PS2 titles, which doesn't strike me as mature enough to really talk about yet. There's also the Dreamcast emulator, Flycast, but the information around this is pretty sparse, most of it being many years old. There appears to be a core for RetroArch and a standalone IPA. From what I've read, both versions have a JIT requirement. I plan to post what I learned in the written guide. I think it's a safe bet that iOS emulation will continue to get better, and I can keep updating the written version of this guide. Wow, you made it to the end of this video. I hope you found it intelligent, enlightening, insightful, inspiring, but most of all, just not unorganized. I'd like to thank my Patreons, because they're the ones who help me keep this ad-free, or mid-roll ad-free. That's good enough.